The job listing had said, "Quiet overnight work, light duties." After 6 months of unemployment checks and ramen dinners, I wasn't in a position to be picky. The Blackfield Public Library needed a night guard, and I needed the $15 an hour. I should have known something was off when the manager, Mrs. Green, conducted my interview in the library's back office with all the lights on, at 2 p.m. on a sunny afternoon. She was a small woman in her 60s with glasses that magnified her tired eyes. The way she kept glancing at the door every time the old pipes creaked should have been my first warning. "You'll just be making rounds, checking doors, that sort of thing," she said, pushing a set of keys across the desk. Her fingernails were bitten down to the quick. "The last guard left some notes. Pay attention to them." The notes turned out to be a yellowed sheet of paper taped inside my assigned locker, titled in shaky handwriting, "Rules for the Night Shift. 1. Never reshelve books after midnight. If you find one out of place, leave it on the cart by the front desk. 2. If you hear humming from the children's section, turn off your flashlight and stand still until it stops. 3. The mirrors in the study rooms are safe until 3 a.m. After that, don't look into them, even if someone calls your name. 4. If the lights in the basement turn on by themselves, lock the security office door and don't come out until sunrise." I chuckled, folding the paper into my pocket. Some bored guard's idea of a prank. At 10:30 p.m., when Mrs. Green left, she paused at the door. "Alex," she said, and I could see her throat working as she swallowed. "The rules aren't a joke. Follow them exactly." The library at night was a different creature than its daytime self. Moonlight streamed through the high stained glass windows, painting the marble floors in fractured colors. The air smelt of dust and old paper, so thick I could taste it. My footsteps echoed as I made my first round, checking study rooms and restrooms. At 11:45, I found my first misplaced book, a thick volume of local history left on a reading table. Remembering the rules, I almost left it there. But come on, I wasn't about to be spooked by some stupid list. I carried it back to the history section and slid it into its proper place between two identical dark green spines. When I turned around, the book was on the table again, not just back on the table, open, to a page showing a black and white photo of the library's original construction in 1898. Workers stood in front of the half-built structure, their faces blurred by time, except one figure in the back, standing too straight, its features oddly sharp. It was looking directly at the camera. A floorboard creaked behind me. I spun around, heart hammering. The aisle was empty, but as I turned back, I noticed something new on the open page, a line of fresh ink, glistening slightly as if still wet, written in the margin beside the strange figure. "You shouldn't have touched me." That's when the humming started. It came from the children's wing, a tuneless, wandering melody that raised the hairs on my arms. Not a child's voice. Something older, wavering between notes like a broken music box. The rules flashed through my mind. If you hear humming from the children's section, the overhead lights flickered once, twice, then went out. Moonlight still painted the floor in patches, but the children's section was a pool of perfect black. The humming grew louder, and then I heard the first book hit the floor. Thump. Then another. Thump. Getting closer. The humming stopped the moment the last book fell. I stood frozen in the dark, my flashlight gripped so tight my knuckles ached. The children's section remained pitch black, but I could hear something moving in there, a slow, shuffling sound like stiff fabric being dragged across carpet. "Turn off your flashlight and stand still." The rules screamed in my head, but every instinct told me to run. My thumb hovered over the flashlight switch as the shuffling grew closer. A cold draft snaked through the aisle, carrying the scent of mothballs and something earthier, like wet soil. The moment I clicked off the light, I regretted it. Complete darkness swallowed me whole. The shuffling stopped. Then, a wet, clicking noise right in front of my face, close enough that I felt the displaced air against my cheeks. Something was standing inches from me. I stopped breathing. My pulse roared in my ears. The clicking shifted to my left, then my right, as if whatever it was tilting its head to examine me from different angles. A strand of my hair stirred, lifted by something's breath. Then, the faintest giggle, high-pitched and wrong, like a child mimicking laughter without understanding it. The overhead lights flickered back on with a buzz. The children's section stood empty. No figure, no monster. Just dozens of books scattered across the carpet like fallen dominoes. And in the center of the mess, lying face up, a picture book I hadn't noticed before. Its cover showed a grinning moon with too many teeth. I didn't touch it. Back in the security office, I slammed the door and pulled out the rules with shaking hands. 3 more hours until the mirrors became dangerous. My watch read 12:37 a.m. That's when I noticed the new rule. Scrawled at the bottom of the page in fresh ink, handwriting I didn't recognize. 5. When the whispering starts in periodicals, count the voices. If you hear a 4th, hide. A chill crawled down my spine. The rules were growing. I spent the next hour glued to the security monitors, jumping at every flicker of motion. The cameras showed nothing unusual, just empty aisles and the occasional drifting dust mote. At 1:45 a.m., I forced myself to make another round, if only to prove I wasn't scared. The library had changed. Subtle things at first: books tilted at odd angles on shelves, chairs pulled slightly away from tables. Then I reached the study rooms and froze. All the mirrors were covered. Thin white sheets had been draped over every reflective surface, though I knew they'd been bare earlier. As I watched, the sheet over room 3's mirror twitched, as if something had brushed against it from underneath. A muffled voice called my name. "Alex!" It came from behind the covered mirror. Not Mrs. Green's raspy tone, not any voice I recognized. This one sounded like it was trying to remember how human speech worked, each syllable stretched and distorted. "Alex, can you help me?" The sheet bulged slightly, forming the vague outline of fingers pressing against the fabric from the other side. I ran. Back in the main hall, I collided with the book cart, sending volumes crashing to the floor. As I scrambled to pick them up, my hand closed around something that hadn't been there before, a small leather-bound diary with no title. It fell open to a page dated October 31st, 1987. They told me not to look, but I had to know. Now I see them everywhere, in the mirrors, behind the shelves. They're learning how to look back. God help the next guard. The page ended in a dark stain that flaked away under my fingers. A new noise cut through the silence, the distant hum of fluorescent lights turning on, coming from downstairs. The basement lights had awakened 2 hours early. The basement door stood slightly ajar when I reached it, a rectangle of sickly yellow light spilling onto the staircase. I could hear the buzz of the fluorescence below, that distinctive, uneven flickering of old bulbs about to die. My fingers trembled as I pulled the rules from my pocket. If the lights in the basement turn on by themselves, lock the security office door and don't come out until sunrise. But the security office was 2 floors up, and something about that open door pulled at me, like a fishhook lodged in my ribs. The diary entry flashed in my mind. They're learning how to look back. 3 steps down, the temperature dropped 20 degrees. My breath fogged in the air as I descended, each creaking stair louder than the last. The basement stretched before me, a maze of towering shelves crammed with archives and forgotten donations. The lights hummed and flickered, making the shadows writhe between the stacks. Then I saw them. Footprints in the dust. Fresh ones, leading from the bottom of the stairs toward the far wall. Not shoes, bare feet, but the toes were too long, the arches too high. My flashlight beam followed the trail to where the basement wall should have been. Instead, there was a door. An old oak door with a tarnished brass knob, where no door had been on the building plans I'd studied. A handwritten sign hung crookedly from a nail. Special collections, staff only. The footprints led right up to it. I should have turned back. Every cell in my body screamed to run, but some stubborn part of me needed to understand. I reached for the knob, and the lights went out. Complete darkness. The fluorescent hum cut off mid-cycle, leaving a silence so thick I could hear my own eyelids blink. Then, from the blackness ahead, a new sound. The slow, deliberate turning of the brass doorknob. I backpedaled up the stairs, my shoulders slamming against the doorframe as I stumbled into the main level. The basement door swung shut behind me with a thunderous bang, cutting off the sound of something scratching at the other side. Back at the front desk, I nearly tore the rules sheet in my haste to unfold it. 3 new lines had appeared. 6. When the basement door appears, do not touch it no matter what promises you hear. 7. The poetry section is safe until 3:30 a.m. After that, avoid rhymes at all costs. 8. If the checkout machine turns on by itself, leave whatever book it scans where it lies. My watch read 2:17 a.m. Poetry would be safe for another hour. I retreated there now, collapsing into one of the reading chairs between Whitman and Dickinson. The familiar names comforted me, though their gilt-lettered spines seemed duller than before, as if fading from the world. That's when I noticed the bookmark. Protruding from an ancient copy of Leaves of Grass was a strip of vellum, yellowed with age. I pulled it free with shaking hands. In the same cramped handwriting as the diary entry, it read, "They built the library over the old Blackfield Asylum's records room. Some doors should stay buried. Some stories should never be read aloud." A cold droplet hit my neck. I looked up. The ceiling above me was weeping. Thin trails of dark liquid oozed between the tiles, dripping onto the carpet with soft plinks. Not water. Something thicker with a coppery tang that turned my stomach. As I watched, the droplets began forming words on the floor. "Let me out." The checkout machine beeped. Across the library, the self-service station flickered to life, its screen glowing an eerie green. I approached slowly, already knowing what I'd find. A single book lay on the scanning pad, Folk Tales of the Blackfield Valley, the same one I'd reshelved against the rules. The screen displayed its title alongside a due date, October 31st, 2023, Halloween. 3 days from now. The machine beeped again and printed a receipt. I didn't want to look, but my eyes betrayed me. One overdue item. Patron, special collections, fine payable in blood. Behind me, every faucet in the library's restrooms turned on at once. The sound of running water snapped me into action. I sprinted to the restrooms, my shoes slipping on the now damp tiles. All 3 sink faucets ran full blast with water the color of weak tea. I reached to turn them off, then froze. The liquid wasn't water. It smelt medicinal, like old antiseptic from a hospital. Rust-colored particles swirled in the basins, collecting around the drains in thick clumps. When I forced myself to shut off the taps, the pipes groaned like a dying animal. A new message had appeared in the steam on the mirrors. "Help us." The word repeated across every reflective surface, scrawled in shaky capital letters. I backed out of the restroom just as the poetry section's motion-activated lights clicked off behind me. The checkout machine beeped again. This time, it spat out a black and white photo from its receipt printer. The image showed the library's staff from decades ago, all smiling, except for one figure in back. A tall man, in an outdated custodian's uniform, stood slightly apart from the group, his face blurred as if he'd moved during the exposure. Something about his posture made my skin crawl. I turned the photo over. Someone had written on the back in red ink, "Mr. Pritchard stays after hours. Don't answer if he calls your name." The lights in the biography section flickered. Between the shelves, something moved. a shadow that didn't match the swaying of my own. I gripped my flashlight like a club, the metal cold against my sweating palm. "Hello?" My voice sounded pitifully small in the cavernous space. Then, "Alex," a whisper from the philosophy section. "Alex," from the periodicals room. "Alex," directly behind me. I whirled around to face the children's section again. The scattered books had been rearranged into a spiral pattern on the carpet. At its center sat the grinning moon picture book, now open to a page I hadn't seen before. The illustration showed a library at night. A tiny figure in a guard's uniform stood frozen in terror as shadowy hands reached for them from every bookshelf. The caption beneath read, "The stories always need new characters." My radio crackled to life with a burst of static so loud I nearly dropped it. When the noise cleared, a wheezing voice whispered, "You're late for your appointment." The checkout machine beeped a third time. Its screen now displayed, "Final warning, return to special collections." The basement door rattled on its hinges. The basement door's rattling shook the entire first floor. Books tumbled from shelves as the vibration traveled through the building. I grabbed the security desk for balance, watching in horror as the brass knob twisted back and forth with increasing violence. A new rule appeared on my crumpled list, the letters bleeding through the paper like fresh ink. 9. When the door opens, close your eyes and count to 30, no matter what you hear. The lock snapped with a sound like breaking bones. The door swung inward, revealing only darkness beyond. A stench rolled out, damp earth and rotting paper with something sweet underneath, like embalming fluid. My fingers found the diary in my pocket, its leather cover suddenly warm to the touch. A whisper floated up the stairs.
"We've been waiting for you, Alex."
Not one voice, dozens, layered together in a horrible chorus. I squeezed my eyes shut and started counting. 1, 2. Cold air licked at my face. The whispering voices dissolved into wet, clicking sounds, like tongues testing unfamiliar words. 7, 8. Something brushed against my arm. Dry paper, brittle fingers. I bit my tongue until I tasted blood to keep from screaming. 15, 16. The temperature dropped so suddenly my teeth chattered. The whispers became moans, then choked sobs. A weight settled on my shoulders like invisible hands trying to push me toward the stairs. 23, 24. The checkout machine exploded in a shower of sparks. Glass shattered somewhere in the fiction section. A book hit the floor near me with a slap. 29, 30. I opened my eyes. The basement door stood closed. The library was silent, but everything had changed. The bookshelves now stood at unnatural angles, forming a twisted maze that hadn't been there before. The ceiling dripped that same rust-colored liquid, forming puddles that reflected not the library but some other place, a room with tiled walls and metal beds. The rules sheet in my hand had transformed. The original instructions were gone, replaced by a single paragraph in elegant calligraphy. Blackfield Library was built upon the ruins of the county asylum's medical wing. The patients never left. They sleep in the stories now, whispering between the pages. Every guard before you became a new character in their tale. Dawn will not come until the story is complete. A new sound cut through the silence, the crisp snick of a book opening behind me. I turned slowly. The grinning moon picture book floated midair, its pages fluttering though no hand held it. As I watched, blank sheets at the back began filling with text. My name, a description of my clothes, every move I'd made tonight. The story was writing itself, and I was the main character. The floating book's pages continued filling with text as I stood paralyzed. My own breathing sounded deafening in the unnatural silence that had fallen over the library. The words materialized in what looked like fresh ink, documenting my every move in real time. Alex's hands shook as he stared at the impossible book. The cold seeped into his bones, but sweat still trickled down his back. He knew, somehow he knew, that when this story reached its final paragraph, he would become just another vanished night guard. I lunged forward and slammed the book shut. It screamed, a high, wailing shriek that came from every corner of the library at once. The lights flickered wildly as books began flying off shelves around me. Something unseen grabbed my ankles, cold, skeletal fingers that burnt through my pants. I kicked free and stumbled toward the circulation desk, my mind racing. The rules had changed because the story wanted me to panic, to make mistakes. But stories had rules too, even haunted ones. I grabbed the checkout computer's keyboard. If this was a story, it needed an ending. And every library book needed to be returned, I gasped, typing frantically at the station. The system blinked. Access denied. The floating book reopened with a snap, pages fluttering toward the final chapter. The temperature dropped so fast my fingers stuck to the keyboard. From the basement doorway came a new sound, the creak of wheels on old floorboards. A hospital gurney rolled into view, its stained sheets shifting as if covering something. I typed harder, trying every combination I could think of. The computer screen flashed red. Final warning. Due date: October 31st, 1898, Halloween. The original asylum's closing date. My fingers flew over the keys as the gurney drew closer. I typed, "Return all." The entire library shook. Every light bulb exploded in a shower of glass. The gurney stopped inches from me as the computer screen flickered and died. For one terrible second, nothing happened. Then, dawn's first light pierced through the stained glass windows. The floating book crashed to the floor. The gurney stood empty. The basement door was gone, just a solid wall where it had been. I collapsed into the chair, my entire body trembling. Mrs. Green found me there at 6:05 a.m. "You're still here," she whispered, her face pale. The rules list in my pocket had returned to normal. The diary was gone. When I checked the history section, Folktales of the Blackfield Valley sat properly shelved, its spine uncracked. I quit that morning. But sometimes, when I pass the library at night, I swear I see a figure watching from the biography section. And if I listen very closely, I can almost hear the faint click of a hospital gurney's wheels. Because some books should never be checked out.